Good afternoon, and welcome to the Creative Capital Artists Lab for Performing Artists on Audience Engagement. This is a 75-minute program. My name is Marisa Lair, and I am the Director of Education at Creative Capital. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a woman with brown curly hair, wearing a black shirt, silver hoop earrings, and silver glasses. I'm sitting at my desk with a bookshelf in the background, and I'm joining you from the Creative Capital office in New York City, which is located on the ancestral unceded homelands of the Lenape people. I encourage you all to introduce yourselves by placing your names and locations in the chat. It's wonderful to see so many of you here from all over. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Creative Capital, we support innovative and adventurous artists across the country through funding, counsel, and career development services. As part of our mission to amplify artists' voices and provide tools and community for artists to thrive, we are pleased to host these online workshops and conversations. We have also launched the Creative Capital Curriculum, which is a series of free online courses for artist professional development. You can see a link to the curriculum in the chat. Our first course is Representing Your Work, a toolkit for grant writing and promoting your practice. This course teaches artists concrete techniques for writing about, speaking about, and representing their practice across a variety of professional contexts, including grant applications, artist talks, and social media. I encourage you all to access this amazing resource, and we welcome institutional memberships from higher education and cultural organizations in supporting this vital resource. If you're interested in becoming a member of the curriculum, please see our curriculum page that was just shared in the chat. In addition, you can learn more, see upcoming workshops, and subscribe to our newsletter on our website, which you can access also in the chat. And I wanted to extend a thank you, a deep thank you, to Angela Maddox, the Director of Artist Initiatives here at Creative Capital, and to Joanna Fernandes, Executive Director at Chicago Dance Makers Forum, for their invaluable guidance and insights in creating this program this afternoon. I would also like to extend a special thank you to the Waldorf Foundation for their generous support of this Artist Lab. In addition, I'd like to quickly acknowledge that our captioning tonight and ASL interpretation is provided by IF Consultant. Thank you, Desiree and Sarika, for your ASL services, and Ewan for your captioning services. And our chat and behind-the-scenes aspects of the webinar is being facilitated by Julia Gunnison, Manager of Artist Initiatives here at Creative Capital. Many thanks to Julia for all of her work on this program. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This afternoon's workshop is being live captioned. To enable captions, click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen and choose subtitles or full transcript, and they will pop up as a box on your screen within Zoom. For questions this afternoon, we ask that you please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use the chat to talk with each other. This session will be recorded and be made available to all who registered for the program. We will send you the recording in a few days. And please make sure that you are not unsubscribed to Creative Capital's newsletter to ensure that you receive messages from us. This afternoon's program is audience engagement for performing artists. And some of the questions that we'll be exploring today include, what are the ethics of working in community? What are the pleasures as well as the challenges when working in community? I'm so pleased to introduce our speakers today, who will be providing their perspectives on these questions and sharing their innovative visions on audience engagement. I'll begin by introducing our speakers, and then they'll each speak to their practices on audience engagement. We'll then turn to a discussion amongst the speakers, and the last 15 minutes of the Artist Lab today will be devoted to questions and answers from all of you in our audience. If our speakers could please turn on your camera when you're being introduced. So I'd like to begin with Yanira. Yanira Castro is a 2023 Creative Capital Awardee. Her work is rooted in communal construction as a rehearsal for radical democracy. She's an interdisciplinary artist born in Boriquen, Puerto Rico, living in Lenapehoking, which is also referred to as Brooklyn, and working at the intersection of communal practices, performance, installation, and interactive technology. Yanira forms iterative, multimodal projects that center land and the complexity of citizenship and governance in works activated and performed by the public. Since 2009, she's created and performed with a team of collaborators as a Canary Torsi. Her recent work includes a performance manual for Reckoning, Last Audience, a performance manual, a participatory podcast to rehearse for a collective future, Last Audience, a performance podcast, and a tea ritual created with 4 teens from New York City Girl Scout Troop 6000 to enact the ingestion of homeland tierra. Currently, Castro is developing her ongoing interdisciplinary work, I Came Here to Weep, a collective exorcism for territorial possession. Castro has been commissioned and presented by numerous spaces, including the Chocolate Factory, Theater New York City, New York Live Arts, MCA Chicago, the Invisible Dog Art Center, Space Gallery, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, the Bates Dance Festival, and ICA Boston. Her work has recently been supported by us here at Creative Capital, the MAP Fund, the Alpert Award for Dance, 2024 NYSCA NYFA Fellowship, and for Interdisciplinary Art, the Maggie Ellison National Center for Choreography, McDowell, Yaddo, and Marble House Project. She has received 2 Bessie Awards for Outstanding Production. Next, I'd like to introduce Ron Berry. Ron is the founder and co-artistic director of Fusebox, a nonprofit arts organization working in Austin, Texas. Ron has helped guide the organization through 20 years of critically acclaimed programming across a multitude of art forms. His particular focus has been on stewarding the annual Fusebox Festival in Austin, Texas, which features local, national, and international artists at sites across the city for 5 days each April. Today, Fusebox collaborates with organizations all over the world, ranging from small grassroots organizations to major art centers and festivals in service to artists and their work. Fusebox hosts 2 festivals, the Fusebox Festival and Live in America, along with year-round programming and events, residencies, and workshops. Fusebox also uses its festival as an opportunity to work hand in hand with community members to creatively address issues facing the city. These efforts has resulted in new initiatives related to community, health, affordable housing, and transportation. Lastly, it is my pleasure to introduce Meida McNeal. Meida is artistic and managing director of Honey Pot Performance. She received her PhD in performance studies from Northwestern University and her MFA in choreography and dance history from Ohio State University. Over the past 2 decades, she has produced numerous creative projects as both a solo artist and with Honey Pot Performance, with works performed in Illinois, Rhode Island, Ohio, California, and Trinidad. Positioning her work as an independent artist and scholar at the intersection of performance studies, ethnography, and Black diasporic cultural production at Northwestern University, Brown University, Governors State, Columbia College Chicago, and University of Chicago. Meida also worked with the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events as the Deputy Commissioner of the Cultural Grants and Resources Division. Previously, Meida served as Senior Manager of Art and Community Impact Investment, spearheading the design and implementation of grant programs focused on pandemic recovery for the arts sector. Prior to this role, Meida worked with the Chicago Park District as Arts and Cultural Manager, supporting community arts partnerships, youth arts, cultural stewardship, and civic engagement initiatives. As you can see, we have an amazing trio here with us this afternoon. And Yanira, I would like to invite you to turn on your camera and begin discussing your work.
Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. And thank you, Marissa, for that very generous introduction. For a visual description, I am a light-skinned, non-disabled Boricua cis woman with white hair that today is pulled back. I use she, her pronouns. I'm wearing big, round, black eyeglasses and a black button-down shirt. And behind me is a set of windows and a bulletin board and a tree to my right. I live on Lenape, Canarsie, and Muncie land, colonially known as Brooklyn, New York. I mean, this topic is huge, and I feel like we're only going to scratch the surface of it. But I want to begin by acknowledging that what we are calling community work is simultaneously complex and also simple. And it is simple because it is about gathering, listening and engaging. And this is something that we do sort of on the daily. The work is, I think, community work is really to expand on that daily experience. So expand on our coffee conversations, expand on our dinner table, expand on dancing in our apartments. The pleasures of community work are really about our senses, right? It's literally the smells and the taste and the touch and the sounds of our being together. So this is what we build on, I think, when we are thinking about community work and being in communion. And whenever I feel lost about what being in community might be or what that work is about, I bring it down to these really simple engagements: a dinner, a coffee, walks, and dances in the kitchen. Community work is complex for at least two primary reasons that I wanted to sort of bring up for me personally. The first is that because gathering and listening and engaging is to invite discomfort, it's to invite our differences at the table, is to invite the complicity of our dynamics and the world we live in and the hierarchies that we are all a part of. And that is to say, how the power is played out at the dinner table or the coffee conversation or in the room. And that community work has to address this in order for us to be in community. The second reason is because we attempt to do community work inside of systems that are arrayed to privatize the experience, right? So we monetize it, we professionalize it, we rarefy it so that systems of selection create priorities that really alienate us from one another. So when art is truly in community, it is not separate from any other aspect of life. It is a lived culture. So I bring all this up because the challenges to communal work and engagement are not insignificant. And I think it's important to lay them out so that we have answers or solutions, or think about how to thicken the simplicity part of gathering, the food part of gathering, and then address also the challenges. So there are three things that I do to disrupt these challenges. And that is really what I wanted to share with you today. Whenever possible, I have a few underlying parameters when I'm sharing the work. The first is that there needs to be food. The second is that the work needs to be free, or at the very least at a sliding scale that includes free. And three, that it needs to be co-hosted. I think food is probably the most, it's the go-to choice for me. It's generous. I'm feeding you. I thought about what to share. It's almost always a cultural, coming from a cultural place. It's primal, it's necessary, and it welcomes. And for me, it's the most immediate thing I can do to engage. Free, because all the barriers for entry to work are pretty high and as much as possible need to be removed. So, performance work is already relegated, and especially experimental work, to the corners, right? You have to be on a mailing list. You have to know the artist. You have to know the organization or a critic. You have to be connected in some way to even know that an event is happening. And that event is happening for a short amount of time and an appointed time, and not when you necessarily happen to be free from your two jobs, right? And it's also at a specific place, so you have to travel. So all these ways in which there are barriers to get to things. If we want live art forms to actually galvanize people, the barriers really need to come down as much as possible. And the one thing that I feel that I have some control over is to make it free. and make being present as easy as is possible. With co-hosting, the third and last is because the more people that we bring along with us, right, the wider our circles and our frame, and the more voices there are to the challenges that might separate us at the table. So who I am co-hosting with is often about relations that I want to thicken, or that I'm curious to deepen, or that challenge me in some ways, and to expand the circles of understanding at the table or in the room. So I invite other artists to share their work or to speak their truth inside of my work. I share platforms that I've been given with local voices or emerging voices. Co-hosting could mean inviting multiple organizations to share in how our project is disseminated to multiple communities. So these, for me, are the three primary ways in which I try to address the challenges of community work, and is the framework in which the work can then take place. The work itself. So my work, as Marissa described in the lovely introduction, is really with the public. And for me, that is very tricky. I was born on a colony of the United States. It's Puerto Rico. I grew up in that colony, and now I live here in the States. And so my relationship to this community and engagement with that community is pretty complex. So how do I share, or how do I get myself to a table with you? How do we have a real conversation? How do we talk about complicity? And how do I do that without giving a history lesson or a lecture? How do I make that visceral and intimate and personal? And for me, what I do is I utilize participatory scores to be the nexus of our engagement. So we create the work together through the score. We negotiate the live moment with what is actually happening through the score. And we interpret the score together. We make meaning in the moment together. The scores, which are always a set of actions, they take myriad forms depending on organizers and collaborators and what feels particularly potent inside of communities. So they are live performances, they are printed manuals, they are installations or a podcast or audience archives. And most recently, they're a public campaign. But even as diverse as all of these forms are, really at the heart and the center of it is a score or a set of scores for us as a group of people to negotiate. And so I just wanted to give a few examples of what that actually might look like, how these parameters come into a work. And the first performance I wanted to sort of talk about is a piece called Last Audience that took place at New York Live Arts in Manhattan. So in that work, in Last Audience, the audience enacted Requiem, or a death mass. And we reckoned with our complicity and grappling with and grief and grappling with and giving mercy and judgment. This is directly after Trump's first campaign. And these were some of the things that I was thinking about. I was thinking about reckoning. I was thinking about judgment, and how we as a community come to terms with what this election was bringing, right? Which seems pretty pertinent as we come on the second go around. But anyway, the audience performed that work. They embodied that work. And so it was very important to me that therefore the performance was be free. And it was also really important to me that before we went into that experience together, that we ate, that we had a meal together, that we had the opportunity to talk across a table and share some of these concerns before we even went in to perform this thing together. Coincidentally, those performances, which were sold out, New York Live Arts later shared with me that it had the most people that had never attended a performance at New York Live Arts inside of those performances. So to me, that was a success, not just because the shows were sold out, but very specifically because there was an entire community of people there that had never attended New York Life Arts and who were potentially there because there was free food and the show was for free, right? And then the last part of the three things was that I brought together other artists to speak at the meal, to share their poetry, to write essays on these themes of judgment and mercy. And so that it wasn't only coming from myself and my collaborators and what the audience itself was talking about, but also bringing in other voices. And then another example is a public art project called Exorcism Equals Liberation, which is the newest project that I've been involved in. And that utilized campaign materials like buttons and stickers and lawn signs and banners and murals to disseminate 3 slogans and QR codes during this election. So the QR codes served as a portal to a short audio experience. Small worlds, oral worlds that spoke to occupation and land and self-determination and invited engagement through gesture, remembering, and weeping. And I just wanted to say, we can scroll through some of these photographs to get towards the end. So these are pictures actually of last audience. So we can keep going through that. So this is the audience doing some of these actions together and performing the work with scores. And that was the meal, arroz con gandules. This is an example of an artist sharing their poetry at the meal. And here's Exorcism Equals Liberation. So so these QR codes, you could find them on the street, on buses, and in community organizations and on the walls of buildings. And I partnered with over 20 organizations to give out for free these stickers and pins and to host these large window and gate posters and to hang banners and also to host these events. The events themselves were meals and long table discussions. If you don't know what a long table is, it's this amazing platform that was created by Lois Weaver of Split Britches. And it was her answer to the panel. And instead of creating a space in which there are experts that, like today, that are sharing with you their expertise, it's a table conversation in which together we are all intricately and communally building the conversation and our knowledge together as we exchange who's a witness and who's at the table talking. So that's a long table. We did street fairs. We did audio archival recordings of people's reactions or memories. And the organizations included art centers, libraries, farms, community centers, college and university campuses, high schools, community gardens, and farmers markets. So a broad range of folks that came together to make this public art project possible that was free to the entire community. And all of these events were embedded in Puerto Rican diasporic communities or they were connected to me through performance and art making. And they took place in New York City, Chicago, and Western Massachusetts, where very big and important diasporic communities of Puerto Rico live and exist. All of these organizations coming together was really made possible by years and years of connections and conversations. The project itself was in conversation for over a year before it was brought on. And it was definitely also a gift of friendship and communication, right? So I have deep bonds with some of the organizations I work with, and they introduced me to other people that also wanted to engage inside the project. And whenever those introductions were made and it was someone new to me, I would go and I would spend time with them and their organization, so that it wasn't just a one-off, but that it was a continual over a year visiting and having conversations about how something would be manifested inside their communities and what they were interested in manifesting inside their communities.
Thank you so much, Yanira.
Yeah,
I had the opportunity to experience your work, and I'm thrilled to hear you speak about it. We're going to have Ron discuss his work, and then we'll come back. You already have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so we'll share those with you
great.
shortly. Thank you.
Thank
Hey, thanks, Janira. That was awesome. Um, um, I'm Ron Berry. I am zooming in from the lands of the Tonkawa and Comanche and Lipan Apache, also known as Austin, Texas. I am in my living room. There are some green plants around me. Some of them are doing better than others. I am a light-skinned male, 52 years old. I have some gray in my otherwise sort of light brown, blondish hair, and I'm wearing a blue striped shirt. Um, I don't have any photos, so I'm just going to talk. If you want to imagine in your mind some broke artists in Austin, Texas 20 years ago. That's when Fusebox began. I was one of these broke artists. We were coming from really different artistic backgrounds, and we were hungry to create a moment that really reached across different art forms and across geography. Like we really liked living in Austin, but we were hungry to connect with other artists living in other parts of the world. And so we started this festival. We had uh, $5,000 and we had some time in this like old garage in East Austin and we started this festival. We had no idea we were going to do it twice, much less 20 times. Really the way that we grew the festival and now sort of the way that we do everything was through collaboration and through partnership. And that was at first just a way to do some things that we couldn't do with our $5,000 budget, but it quickly became this essential way of working. The act of producing a festival became an act of community building and being in community. And sitting across the table from other community members and talking about what would be interesting to do together, what's happening in Austin, what's not happening here, what would we like to do together. And sometimes that was us bringing an artist or a project to the table. Sometimes it was a community partner bringing something to the table. And I should say for us, there was like, there's not like a cookie cutter this is what it means to partner with Fusebox or be in collaboration with us. It's like each of these relationships is like a relationship, and it's kind of unique to that organization, to that entity, to that person. And we treat each other like I don't know, like people, like we're entities in the world and want to see each other as whole beings, entities. And that's also been really joyous, I would say, especially, my God, there's a lot going on in the world, and it's, I do find comfort and strength and joy in being in community and having all these relationships. These partnerships and collaborations, I would say, started locally and have grown. And now live sort of nationally and internationally. I think part of our work and role, at least sort of in the local landscape, is also to connect with all different types of organizations, from really small grassroots DIY organizations, perhaps they're all volunteer, no paid staff, all the way up to like big institutions, and we can sort of leverage and redirect some of those resources that big institutions have and get them to artists that need them or could really use them. But we're not necessarily beholden to the to the all the mechanisms and bureaucracy and politics of a big institution. So for me, that's been really helpful and interesting. and meaningful. I would also say that like this is like I do think collaboration and partnering is this sort of core value of ours. I would also say um, after 20 years that it's been really vital and helpful to kind of hang on to this sense of not knowing. I think that's been a key part of our work in terms of working in community with multiple communities. And maybe that's just a way of talking about how do you not calcify over time? How do you remain curious and open? But it's for me, that's a really helpful idea to kind of hang on to, especially over time. You know, in the beginning, we really didn't know what we were doing. And like now, 20 years later, we do know some things, but I think it's helpful to like remember this and hang on to this sense. And that's led to different things. And we've used our festival to look at things with our various communities like gentrification and housing. We had this opportunity to help lead a planning and an imagining process for a new development in East Austin, which is one of the fastest gentrifying areas in the whole country. And we wanted to imagine a process that was really led by and centered by the neighborhood itself and not the developers. And so we met with like we had probably over 200 meetings with different folks from the neighborhood, and we designed this process so that our festival was halfway through this process. And we used the festival to model a lot of the ideas that had been generated from the neighborhood and created a sort of pop-up village, and then invited the neighborhood and the city and the developers out to experience this and give, hey, what do you, this is what we've heard. What do you like? What do you not like? And then we gave that feedback to the developers. And out of that, like 300 units of deeply affordable housing came out. Some new trailways for kids to get to school came out of that. So anyway, that was very interesting to me that this festival could be a platform to experience amazing artists, and it could also be this place where we could come together in different ways with different stakeholders, and like housing could come out of that. That was like really kind of cool, and some other community health projects have come out of that. I should say we weren't trying to like be developers. That's really not who we are. But I do think that we are pretty good at creating a certain kind of space for people to come together and use their imaginations together and think about things together and feel things together. And that's something that we could do. Um, and then lastly, I was just thinking that I would share a little bit about our work with this uh, program project of ours called Live in America, that was led by the fabulous Kara Martinez, who's now working with Young Arts in Miami. But basically, we were really interested in this relationship between cultural practice and artistic practice and place. And we were also interested in learning about what was happening in different parts of our country, perhaps specifically also like outside of our biggest cities. And so we didn't start in New York or LA or Chicago or Houston. And for about 5 years, we were working with people in about 8 different places around North America. We were working in El Paso, Juarez, across the U.S.-Mexico border. We were working in Puerto Rico. We were working in rural Alabama. Um, we were working with about 150 native artists outside of Albuquerque, and then working in 3 kind of mid-sized American cities, New Orleans, Detroit, and Las Vegas. And we basically hired people that lived in each of those places that have deep relationships with those communities. And then they proposed projects to be in a festival that we would do, that we hosted in the middle of our country in Arkansas. So it was really this basically a decentralized curatorial um, structure that was really fun. And I think it was interesting to hear Janira, there was so much that resonated with what you were saying, Janira, but like all of that, so much of that work was just at least initially built around food. Like when we go visit these places, like we didn't even like we just, let's just eat together and be with each other and learn about each other. That was such a foundational part of that process. Um, so I'm a big believer in food for all those reasons. It's a wonderful organizing principle and cuts through a lot of bullshit. Um, and also the free and affordable thing. It's like we about 10 years ago we made our whole festival free. And really set it up as like an experiment to see what that does. And after 3 years, we'd seen like a 60% increase in first time festival goers, and also people like started to engage very deeply. Instead of seeing one or two shows in the festival, they would go see about five or six things. So it created this very sort of deeply engaged group of folks. So that was really fun. Um, I think I think that's I think that's it for now. So yeah, just thinking really about community and collaboration and partnership as this sort of central way of working for us. And then wanted to share this example of this Live in America project that was really kind of embracing this decentralized curatorial strategy that really centered a pluralistic approach and also a hyper-local approach to curation.
Thank you so much, Ron. That was fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Maida, would you like to go?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Meida McNeal, coming to you from Chicago, the land of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi people, and other indigenous nations. Um, I am a biracial woman, Black and white. And wearing a cozy cardigan in warm tones because I'm home today, working from home, and with some comfy gold hoops on. So I am part of an organization here in Chicago called Honey Pot Performance. We are consider ourselves a Black feminist multidisciplinary performance and public humanities organizations. You can go to the next slide. And who you see before you, that's our core team. And around that, we work with a host of other, mostly young and mid-age Black cultural producers in the city. And we've been working together. I also hear some similarities around, we've been working together for over 20 years in different iterations of ourselves and with some pauses as well. But decided we wanted to, keep making work and have that as a part of our life practice together. All of us, I think, are artists, but also educators, researchers, and bring our different talents to the table. We've got a sociologist in the mix. We've got a clinical therapist, someone who runs IT. And we bring all of that knowledge in addition to the creative skills as DJs or dancers or writers into the space when we make work together. Our works are typically long form, evening length performances that are crafted over a longer period of time. And why we do that is a lot of the community engagement and building happens, throughout the work. And so that first phase, anywhere from 6 to 8 months, is usually a series of designed experiences and experiments where we are gathering stories, making things together in the body, and taking all of that source material into the studio to create things and create a world that will become the work. Then we, on the back end, typically document and make something that represents all of that information, and thinking about contributing to new knowledge, especially as kind of Black feminist folk, like thinking about a part of our work, the political impact is that we are documenting the stories of Black people who make things, and that we need more opportunities for that. So I will talk a little bit when I get into the project examples about how we do some of that documentation and knowledge creation through the work and the process, and as well continuing the community building through that. Okay, we can move to the next slide. As I mentioned, I really think about Black feminism as the backbone to our work. And so just wanted to share some of these tenets that we think are important, and I think also lend to a way of thinking about how the work is not transactional. It is really about, like, we are building relationships with folks who become part of the making of whatever it is we are doing, as well as experiencing it possibly as audience members. But yeah, it's a kind of framework of things and values that help us think about the kinds of communities we want to participate in and model through the work. We are all, as Yanira spoke about, I think a lot about power negotiation and kind of teasing that out, always thinking about where is power, how is it enacted, who has it at any time. Like, we are thinking about that in the ways that who we focus on to kind of gather stories and make things about and with, who we are bringing into, like, the production circle and paying for their work and knowledge, that all of that is also invested with power, and negotiating that. Really think about dialogue as a center in the work, and that the work is opening up dialectics and debates, but also conversation and connection, and ways of envisioning a better society that we all want to live in and participate in. And then I think a bit about shared vulnerability, that we are always taking risks together when we ask people to come in for those experiments and experiences, that we are asking them to take a risk, share something, be vulnerable with other folks, and that creates a space where performance becomes more like community. Okay, next slide. A changing kind of vantage point on that same thing, in terms of thinking about Black feminism as, like, the backbone, and also thinking about, like, what are these the guide stars that are part of our values and practices and politics. So in Chicago, we are really thinking about how we are supporting our local ecosystem of arts and culture, and we have been, for the better part of our lives as a collective and now an organization, we have been itinerant and mostly doing our work on the south and west sides of the city, where it's a larger population of Black and brown folks, and often in disinvested community. And we have actually just in the past year moved into a church that we have been collaborating with since 2019 on the west side, in the Garfield Park Fifth City neighborhood, which is actually where my family is from. And sort of really thinking about how we build more spaces for cultural production and gathering and joy and pleasure and leisure in these communities that don't necessarily have these spaces, and how to build the right space that shares with the church, right? We're not, like, becoming a vulture in their space. We are good neighbors and collaborators there in the space, but also how do we build the right the floor that fits in the sanctuary, the right seating, lights, projection, all these things that can live in the space. So when we are offering space up to local cultural producers, we are able to present them with care and with some sort of robustness that honors their practice as well. Okay, we can go on. So this next couple of slides is about Ladies Ring Shout, which is a work that was created in 2011 with 3 women, but emerged out of a creative women's circle that met weekly in 2009, 2010 on the heels of the Great Recession. And we were thinking a lot in particular about a space for Black women's voices and in the after effects of that economic impact. And how there weren't really spaces in the public arena that we were seeing talking about that. So we create a Ladies Ring Shout, which we think of as kind of like a quality of life performance project, where we took all of the weekly experiments and dialogues and things we were making together in that weekly workshop to create a larger 90-minute work that is thinking about Black women's perspectives and all of that. And we came back to the work as one of the projects that we collaborated with the church, with First Church on in just the past couple of years, and rebuilt it with a cast of 9, an intergenerational cast of Black women, to kind of enlarge our circle. Was the first time we had really expanded our work behind our kind of core creative team and ensemble. But thinking again about like, how do we enlarge that? How do we take the methods that we've been building together and working with community on to a larger ensemble? And we're really encouraged by the conversations that we had, the healing that happened for this larger community of Black women together through the work, and then the circles that they brought into the space for our performances and workshops. Also want to note here that we are also a pay what you can kind of organization, and don't sliding scale, don't want money to be a prohibitor to people experiencing our work or being in communion with us through the work. Okay, we can move forward. So then I want to talk a little bit about the Chicago Black Social Culture Map. So this particular work came, or project, it is now a 10-year initiative. We just celebrated 10 years of this initiative this past weekend at First Church. Came out of a performance project we did in 2014 called Juke Cry Hand Clap. So we all grew up with house music as a formative part of our understanding of ourselves, and as we grew in as people from youth to adults, house music and the way that it originated, grew, evolved in Chicago, not just as a music, but as a culture and a way of interacting with folks through in social space, that it was really important to us to go back and kind of think about how house music was connected to things that were older than itself. So thinking about the 2 waves of Black migration from the 1910s to the 1970s, and what that set up as a in that research and design process. Yeah, you can start to just kind of like roll through the images here. Yeah. So what that set up as part of this process was an environment where we mapped social spaces together over 6 months. We have monthly parties that involve both individual mapping of people's kind of memories of spaces and dances and DJs and places, or places that family or that they knew about that were connected to and went to. And then we also had large maps that just low tech, just using Post-its, having people kind of place those memories. And then that would ignite discussions and debate about where places were and when. And then that became that from that performance project, we mapped over 350 social spaces and people and places related to house music and its forebears in Chicago. And we decided we wanted to make new knowledge out of that and give that knowledge back to the people who had shared it with us. So we started a digital online map and community archiving initiative that has just grown from strength to strength, where we now when we got to a point where we hit a wall with our kind of core creative ensemble, we enlarged the circle to include ambassadors and folks we knew as local experts of this tradition, of this culture, and the prior culture across the 20th century of Black sociality. We open the circle to engage them as well in kind of capturing these places and the history and trying to find media that matched it. And then we moved on to live programs because we got to a point where we needed to bring it into a public arena. And it felt right also to kind of begin to share, to highlight the producers of that knowledge in public settings. So where they are talking about those stories and talking thematically in conversations with each other about the various eras of house and iterations over time since the late 70s to now, right? That it is a culture that began when kind of queer Black and brown folks and teens, youth, and then has evolved in so many different ways and wanting to kind of capture that really rich story. We have also worked with youth and kind of built a curriculum around that work to kind of think about how that information is passed on into next generations and thinking about the pedagogy and the politics of that information as knowledge and sharing that on. And what else did I want to say? Yeah.
Are you concluding, Meida? I just want to give a chance for all of you to be in conversation together.
Yeah. So I think the last thing I want to say just is that, I mentioned we are on the West Side now in Chicago. And so the next project that we are embarking on is called Pleasure Power Portal. And that one will really focus on various West Side communities, young folks, seniors, adults, families in Garfield Park. And then there are several other, greater West Side communities, Humboldt Park, North Lawndale, Austin, that we want to engage folks to kind of help build that story and make it even more hyper local to that space. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. Ron and Shanita, if you'd like to turn on your cameras and your audio, I'd love to just give you all some time together to be in conversation. And then to our audience, if you'd like to pose any questions in the Q&A, I will be sure to share them after our presenters have had a chance to be in conversation.
First of all, it was just amazing hearing everything that you're doing, Meida. Thank you so much. And one of the things that I kept coming back to and listening to both of you is this sort of aspect of time, and that for you, Meida, that you've been working inside this church for I don't know how many years before there was this new invitation. Like how do we, work together? And then Ron, just thinking about how, the decision to make the festival for free. And then 3 years later, you're like, okay, here's what we're actually finding out now. And that it takes time. I think oftentimes when I say to someone, let's make this performance for free. Of course, they have all these concerns. But often the very next show is at a price point again. And so it takes an investment and time with people to sort of understand like how these decisions can actually really change our audiences, change our experiences, change our community. And so that's something that I just kept thinking about and listening to both of you talk.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I spot on, Yanira. Like, and I think, yeah, I think if you're doing work that you're saying is invested in community and working with community, then it's humans, it's relationship dependent, and all of that requires time. And I think you learn over time that like the invitations have to change. Like you have to keep iterating how you're asking, the ways you're asking. That's part of that.
Yeah, time is so important. Like with our Live in America project, I mean, we spent like 5 years. Just and a lot of the first year was just like getting to know people and like not even like trying to figure something out. And I think it's often it can be easy to sort of uh in I don't know, in working with community to create something that is for a specific project, and then it's like on to the next thing instead of sort of thinking about this as a relationship that doesn't actually have an endpoint. That feels really different. Um, and also, like with the free thing, like I don't, people have lots of feelings about that, and I get it. And it's, we also needed time to be able to just like have these conversations with people and like actually, also talk about the economics of this work. I think like a lot of people felt like when they were buying a ticket that they were paying for this thing. And it's like, yeah, you're not actually paying for like 5% of this thing. And so like let's talk about that. And we prioritize paying artists. It's our biggest festival expense, but it's also not the $15 we were charging for tickets. Like it costs a lot more to do this work. And so it was actually helpful having a little bit of time to kind of just like actually hash out like what we're doing and why we're doing it, and having an economic discussion about it as well. I'm
Yeah.
curious about how in Maida you talked about this, and Janera, I'd be curious how you think about this as well. Just the this idea of working intergenerationally. That's something that has become very important to us. I'm just sort of curious if that just hear you think about that, or how you incorporate that into your work.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, for me, I feel like it's a natural progression of getting older. You know,
Yeah.
I have elders that I look up to that I have to learn so much from still, and want to engage and be in conversation. Uh and there's also an entire generation that's younger than myself that I also want to learn from. And so I know for me, it's just this sort of natural place of where I am, where I'm just wanting to be in communication with as many people as I can, and be learning about how people communicate, how they learn. I mean, it's so different for so many people. And so then how can you create spaces in which that intergenerational exchange can happen? We talked a lot about this with the QR code, like which communities would feel really comfortable with it, which would not. And so I had all these conversations with I have a long relationship with Curry High School with Valerie Zanos, who teaches there an art program. And so I visit the students there, like, at least twice a year. And, I just had this long conversation with them about the QR code and what would make them go to a QR code. And then I also had that same conversation with people at Honeycomb Network in Humboldt, where I was like, okay, why would you, and their concerns were about like, well, if I click on the QR code, I might get, hacked, or my phone might be taken over. And so really recognizing just like how differently different communities, different age groups are considering like one piece of technology, right? And so, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, I guess I think about, everybody's got a story to tell. We want to hear them all, and like older folks still got stories, and knowledge and wisdom that we need. And we are like middle aged now in our making, and our bodies can still move, and we have stories to tell, and wanting to honor that, and also being really curious about, how does dancing change? How does theatricality and these the way we engage technology change as we get older as makers? And then I also teach, um, often at the university level, and just seeing a change in young, just that 18 to 21, 22, like that they are the questions they're asking are different. The ways they are thinking about the world are different. We have engaged a lot of younger folks to work with us on like our social media and our marketing and those aspects of our work with Honey Pot Performance, and like that lends a whole new valence of like the way they exchange information and think about visuals is different, and so we want to invite all of that to I think support the longevity of like the organization we're building, that at some point we will want to hopefully pass this on to others to continue to breathe life into it as an organization. So we have to keep enlarging the community. We have to be looking both, beyond us and behind us, to make that happen. I had a question just about, everybody's working with so many different kinds of partners, institutions, collectives, small, communities. How do you think about working with those different kinds of partners, differently or the same, or?
well, funding wise, I totally work differently. So as an example, to get the work supported in Massachusetts, I went to Amherst College. It's a very wealthy college, and I was also working at UMass at Amherst. Also, a state college has some resources. And then I was working with the community in Holyoke, Massachusetts, farms and community gardens, et cetera. And so one of the ways in which I work is being very direct to the folks at Amherst, going, I want you to pay for my time and the work that I'm doing in Holyoke, because I know you can do that. And as being inside of community, that is important, because you are all in the same community. And so having really honest conversations about that, sometimes it's like, you as an organization have this support. It actually would mean very little to you, but it means a lot, and is a lot of money for these other folks. And so it becomes a really collective also conversation about the budget, which is really interesting.
I wanted to bring in some related questions that we have from our audience. And one of them is, when we make work in which public or community labor, such as emotional or creative work, is such an engine of work, how do we credit, compensate, and converse about our crediting compensation in a transparent way for collaborators and community participants? I was wondering if any of you could speak to that idea of like crediting collaborators and community participants.
So I guess I'll note that when we are asking people for, like, with the map, the Chicago Black Social Culture map, like we pay everyone, like all of our panelists and talent who share their work receive compensation for their time and knowledge. We share back the transcripts when they're completed. They have access to images if they want them. And we honor, there's in order for us to add anything to our digital archive, there is a policy and a form in place that people have to give us permission to be able to do that. When we are creating other performance work, and we try to track, when we're doing our kind of experiments and experiences, we try to track who is involved, and make sure we list all of those folks as contributors to the work. So those are some of the ways we think about that.
I think my response is very similar. We support and pay every person that is involved. Any person who shares a poem, speaks, is related to any of the activities, is supported. All the artists that are involved in the project are paid and credited. We have a pretty extensive website for a lot of the projects that we've developed and created. And so we list inside of those all the communities and organizations and people that have come together to support the work. And at events, just really speaking to the collaborative process of how the work gets made, and having, and being very transparent about that.
We have another question that's directed to Yanira, but I'm wondering if you could all speak to it. It's about creating relationships with partners in public spaces. So in this case, the audience member is asking about relationships with partners to display banners in public spaces the way you did, and if there was a need for government approval. But I'm also wondering, both in terms of Ron and Meida's practices, how much negotiation that you need to do with government and other entities to realize your practices.
I'll just speak really quickly to the banners. So the organizations that hosted those banners in their spaces, so that they covered their windows or their gates, they paid for those to be put in their spaces. There were some elements that I created myself by hand. So I created these 3.5 by 5 feet banners made out of canvas. If there was an organization that wanted to have some kind of public display but didn't have the funds to sort of support that happening in their space, I gave those canvases to them, for free, so that they could also have a way of being in relation to the work. The stickers and the pins were also for free. So what some people did was they created a mosaic of the stickers, like on their doors, or things like that. So we figured out ways in which, if they wanted to be a part of the project, that they could do so without paying. But for those organizations that could, I collaborated alongside them to imagine what that would be on their building. And so, yeah, I hope that answers the question, but. Oh, in terms of permits, well, so the 600 lawn signs in Chicago was like at least a 4 or 5 month conversation around whether or not to do that guerrilla or not. And ultimately it was decided by the organization that was leading that to do it guerrilla and not to do permits.
As a city worker, I did not hear that.
Notice that I didn't name the organization.
this is just uh, maybe this is just a note about sort of public works in the public spaces. I just thought this was so interesting. Several years ago, we did this. It was a dance performance. This choreographer, Willie Dorner, has this piece called Bodies in Urban Spaces. And it's literally like a group of dancers making basically geometric shapes in public spaces. But like part of the work is like rehearsing this in public spaces. And it was like we got the cops called like multiple times, and like literally people are just making shapes in public spaces, and like I don't know, people lost their minds. I was like, it was just such an interesting example of like how much, like what is permitted in public spaces, what's not. Like if it's for a commercial purpose, like anything goes. If it's something else, like once it was clear that it was performance when we had audiences there, then like everyone was okay with it. But it was like these rehearsals when it wasn't clear that I think people got triggered or something, but it was like literally just people making shapes in public space. I thought that was so wild.
Yeah, and I'll just share also with the lawn signs. We did them at the campus at UMass, and the Art Center put them up, and then the UMass powers that be took them down, and then the students put them back up. So it turned out to be this like interchange between the Art Center and then the campus and then the students, like, and to me that actually, when those kinds of exchanges happen, like why are people making geometric shapes out in public? It actually is a moment to open up an entire conversation around what is public space, who gets to be in public space, what is the conversation that we get to have in public spaces, and who gets to control that, right? So I would get messages from like students who were like, I'm putting out my exorcism equals liberation sign back out. And I'd be like, go with God, you know? So yeah, so I think that exchange is actually also really important.
So I wanted to end with one last question from the audience, and it has to do with large funders who bring in these kind of multi-million-dollar, multi-year projects to arts and cultural organizations to come into smaller areas to develop or further projects with local communities. But then these funders eventually leave, and the financial support to the direct communities go with them. So what do you think the responsibility is, if any, for larger arts and cultural organizations doing this work to ensure that creative processes and community autonomy doesn't end with the project when the project is done? And we have time for maybe one response.
I mean, you have to commit. I mean, that's how I feel about it. You must, it's a commitment to people. I just want to say that as artists, I think we experience that all the time. We get a nice sum of money, and then that's it. Then it's, the relationship is over, right? So in relation to funders, that's not just a one that is in connection to community, but it's also in connection to artists themselves, right? So how do we create sustaining networks of community and conversation goes much deeper. It's all across how the funding network is built, and their relations with organizations, their relations with artists, their relations with community. Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly say that, yeah, it's also tricky because I feel like, yes, like it is a problem when, like there's a lot of funding and then it disappears. I feel like I experience that too as I navigate the public world of funding as a city worker, right? And see it from, as a resource sharer, how do we do that responsibly and try to find more resources. At the same time, as a maker, I'm thinking a lot more about like, how do we don't always want to be dependent on, the philanthropist and the, public monies as well. Like, how do we get folks to support the work, or how do we think about the services we're engaged in as facilitators or other kinds of makers, as like, how do we monetize that and share that to support our work, right? That like there's some kind of balance there that has to be reached. Like I don't want to be holding the funders all the time, but I also find that funding important, so.
I think thinking about commitment and balance is a wonderful way to kind of close this conversation. I so appreciate all of you, Yanira, Ron, Meida, for being here. And I so appreciate all of our audience members. And thank you. Please keep an eye out for future Artist Labs. I'm thrilled to have had all of you in conversation together today.
Thank you so much, Marissa.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.